Thanks everyone for being here. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's roundtable on Horizon Planning, Preparing for the Users of the Future. This roundtable is brought to you by Renewed, the open network for specialized subscription, membership and event professionals. My name is Sue Stevens and I'm the Executive Director for Renewed Europe, and I'll be moderating today's event. If you have any questions for today's speakers, you can submit them throughout the presentation and at the end during the Q&A session by using the chat function. After the presentation, you'll have access to the recording and slides, and we'll send you an email with the link once that's available online. Please keep yourself on mute to minimize background noise. Do turn your videos on if you can. It makes a big difference to see someone's faces out there. Please put your name and company in your box so we know who's asking questions. So on to today's session. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers, Jennifer Schivas and Will Bailey from 67 Bricks. 67 Bricks is one of Renewed's partner members and is a technology consultancy and full service product development team. Today's session will take us through trend forecasting into the users of the future and what we can do now to plan for that. I'm going to hand over now to Jennifer to give a bit more information on 67 Bricks and get the session started. So Jennifer, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Sue, and welcome everyone. To this 67 Bricks and Renewed webinar. Really pleased to be invited. And yes, as Sue says, we are here today to talk about preparing for the users of the future. And please, yes, do feel free to drop questions in the chat box as we go, because we'll have lots of time for a bit of discussion and we can pick up on any comments or thoughts that you might have. But we want to start by reminding ourselves where we are today. So a nice big picture of us. The year, as you know, is 2024. I'm Jennifer Schivas, I'm CEO of 67 Bricks, and I'm joined by our Head of Partnerships, Will Bailey. And all of us here on this webinar today are in the business of providing specialist information of one kind or another, whether that be through technology, publications, events, databases. I know we've got people on the call from financial information, scholarly publishing, B2B publishing, market intelligence. So really we've got a full spectrum of content experts from looking at the agenda and the list. So it's really brilliant to have you, and you're all very welcome. And I think whatever type of business we work in, our lives in 2024 are probably already looking quite a bit different to when many of us started out. So even just in the last 15 months, we've seen the initial rise of generative AI, what I'm going to call old-fashioned AI, the type of thing that powers things like Spotify and Netflix recommendations and Google Maps. We now entirely take that for granted. Most of us have seen the rise of smartphones, which are more or less a requirement for modern life these days. Our expectations of speed and personalization and service, that's been set by people like Google and Uber. We're starting to see video become the preferred mode of consumption with the rise of TikTok and the attention economy. And we're facing fears about misinformation as we head into the elections, deepfakes, that kind of thing. And interestingly, and perhaps surprisingly, face-to-face events have had a bit of a bounce back after COVID. Will and I have just come back from one, which is lovely. But we're on a webinar today, and I guess we might not be sure if that's forever or if it's a bit of a kind of post-COVID rebound. So yeah, so things have moved hugely in the last 10 years or so, but they very much remain in flux, and we know that change is a constant thing. So now let's imagine that the year is 2034. This is Cleo. She is one of your target key users. She uses the information that your company provides to perform her job. Now, I deliberately have not said if she works in research or if she's an analyst or a practitioner or what subject matter she's interested in. I think in this industry, we sometimes tend towards exceptionalism, so thinking our little niche is super different and super special. And of course, I agree, we are all super special, but at a higher or more general level, our expectations around how we receive and consume information are very much shaped by the bigger world around us. So in 2024, my default has become to find a search bar and drop keywords in it, because Google's been my default, my go-to for so long now. But in 2034, Cleo's world probably looks a bit different to ours. We don't know what that's going to look like, of course, but I'm going to make some predictions. So my first prediction is around the human AI augmented workforce, with human experts guiding AI. We're going to be able to do things faster at greater scale and focus our human attention on perhaps new or different tasks. Here I'd urge you to think about the internet. So it put paid to certain jobs, yes, but on the whole it also created new jobs and it changed the nature of what we do. It allowed us to do more faster globally. So the resulting expectations of a human AI workforce on speed and performance and outputs, that's going to be really significant. We will see generative AI baked into most processes and services. So we were joking at the start of the call that I was going to go off to ChatGPT after the call and write a theme tune for Renewed. I have to set myself off and go and do that. But in the future, I won't kind of have to actively set out to use generative AI. Equally, it won't be something I can make a decision to avoid. It will just be baked into the products and services that I use. Niche online communities will flourish in a world of information overload, just more and more and more content. There will be a rising user desire to find places where smaller tribes can find each other and interact in a more intimate way. Will and I were recently at a media conference where the mantra of the event was "no niche is too niche," and I quite like that. It feels very relevant to the renewed world. We're going to see immersive technologies become mainstream, so the cost and the barrier to entry is becoming lower. Big implications here for training, for events, for education, and of course for entertainment and media. Some really tangible things there in that world. And we'll see even higher demands for personalization, interconnection, and speed. I'd urge you to think about the level of interconnection and speed and personalization that we already expect. I've spent, I think, the last 7 years or so banging this particular drum, and I expect that we'll still be talking about it in 10 years' time. There's no maximum level for this kind of stuff. And so all of those changes will have an impact on how we expect to find and consume information. So thinking about Cleo and her expectations around how she's going to find and consume information. A key thing is prompt and answer. So prompt answer replaces search and gets some descriptive information back that I then have to interpret myself and try and work out the answer. So Cleo's going to get what she wants much quicker. She can then interrogate that, reframe it, question it further from there. It's moving from wanting the Google-like experience that I was expecting in 2024 to more of a generative AI type experience. And Google search itself is already moving that way. So, you probably already know this, of course, but after this call, you can try it. Pop to Google, type what is the capital of France into the search box, and it will tell you the answer as you are typing. So you don't even need to finish asking the question. And that's indicative of the direction of travel. We'll see that reading and inputting text may not be the default. I don't think it will be the default. And it's kind of sad for people like me, I think, that love text. But I think about what we're already starting to see with video as the default mode for the younger generation. Voice search from Siri and Alexa. That really cool thing where you hold your phone up to someone who's wearing an amazing outfit and, draw a circle around it and it tells you where to buy it. Those preferences and expectations are not going to change. So the next generation is not going to, love all that, then wake up on their 30th birthday and start preferring broadsheet newspapers. They're going to take these preferences with them into their working lives and through their working lives. One thing we'll see is publisher deals with major AI providers. In 10 years' time, they will, they'll be in place. At the moment, we're seeing New York Times suing OpenAI, Microsoft for copyright infringement, Axel Springer signing a significant deal with OpenAI. On the other hand, in 10 years' time, these deals will be in place. Or, perhaps even worse, they won't be in place and the horse will have bolted and will be in the new normal. But either way, and it'll probably be somewhere in the middle, right? We will not be having our content used by AI, either at a training level or a user product level. And I think, in fact, many of the things that we spend a lot of energy worrying about today will either be resolved or they'll have evolved or they'll be kind of accepted in one way or another. So we run quite a lot of webinars and training on AI for publishers, and we worry a lot about hallucinations and accuracy. And we worry about that stuff rightly. But the speed of improvement that we've seen over the last 15 months is already super staggering. In 10 years' time, we're going to have moved on there significantly. Two final things. Content at the point of need over navigation to publisher platforms. So Clio will expect the answers to come to her where she is. So this idea that you might kind of have an idea of something you want to research, power up a laptop, navigate to a publisher website, log in and search from there. That will not be the way that we deliver value to busy decision makers, to busy researchers, to busy practitioners. They will want those answers at the point of needs, for the answers to come to where they are in whatever tool or platform or location that might be. And trust will be paramount in a world of potential misinformation. So I expect regulation, which is not currently moving as fast as AI developments. I expect regulation will have caught up somewhat in 10 years. It might not have done, and there'll be content anarchy. Probably the truth again will be somewhere in the middle. But either way, the role of trust and being a trusted provider, whether that's a brand, increasingly it's an individual that people feel they can trust, that just feels so important, and there's got to be a role for us as an industry there to play. It's really important. And finally, I just wanted to highlight what I think is an interesting challenge for all of us in this webinar, and that is the greater erosion of the direct relationship between the information creator and the user. In many cases, and this is actually already the case for some B2B publishers with amazing data as a service strategies, your most frequent direct user of the future, the thing that takes your information and uses it and interprets it, will be a machine. But ponder that, so it won't be Clio, it'll be like AI Clio. But ponder that alongside this increasing sort of societal shift towards greater personal interaction with content creators, towards trust in people, the kind of rise of influencers, seeking out niche communities to be part of. I've been thinking about this all morning actually. And my latest thoughts is that the first one is mandatory. It's an unavoidable part of the world that we're going to have to need to play in 2034. But these things they're not mutually exclusive. So for those of us who are creating products, who are putting on events, who are serving specialized communities or societies, as we have many people on the call, it just feels so important that we find a way to cater to both these realities. Okay, so where does that leave us? I believe that the information sources Clio will rely on to do her job in 10 years' time provide prescriptive intelligence delivered at the point of need, which is a lovely little sentence, but the words in it are really important. So prescriptive intelligence, it's not descriptive or informational, it's an answer. It's an insight, it's knowledge, it's active, it's suggesting a decision or making an assertion. And it's delivered at the point of need. So again, this is really active. It's going where the user is at the moment they need it. It's not waiting to be found on a different platform somewhere over here. So it's great to see that some of us are still thriving in 2034. I don't think we all will be. So I'm just going to hand over to Will now, who's going to take over the mic and talk about how we might get there.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. So to help frame the journey to get to that point that Jennifer's described, I wanted to use something that we employ as part of the technology and product consulting we do at 67 Bricks across the information services space. So forgive the short kind of plug for our services. But this is our product data maturity map. On the next slide, please. So we provide a diagnostic service to help executives understand where they are on this journey, measuring companies on their data, their product, their people, and their process. And we signpost the highest value steps to take to move into the future. The information company that Jennifer has just described, delivering prescriptive intelligence at the point of need, is over there on the right at stage 4. But in our experience, most of you will currently fall somewhere between stages 1 and 2. So for the next few slides, I wanted to walk through these stages, what they look like, what's required to move forward to be prepared for the user expectations of the future. Next slide, please. So the first stage is delivering raw content assets. As we've got limited time, I'll just speak briefly about each of these areas and pull out a couple of key points. But if you're interested in diving into more detail on any of this, as Sue and Jennifer have said, we'll be sharing slides afterwards, and very happy to pick up the conversation and chat more. But broadly, at this stage, your users are getting everything that you offer as an information business by reading a standalone piece of content contained in a standalone product, or going to a standalone talk in a standalone event. The sum total of the value of your product is contained within the content. So despite some consistent tagging that you've been through, your content leaves the user to do all the work to find what they need. And it's hard to change this quickly because of the mindsets and processes embedded in the organization. This is the way that we've been operating. This is what we do. This is what we'll continue to do. This is where many specialist business information organizations find themselves currently, and it isn't all that different to where they may have been 10 to 15 years ago. And as you'd expect me to say, there are risks inherent with getting stuck at this stage. So as customer expectations shift towards a one-stop shop for all their information needs, you become increasingly disconnected from their broader digital experience. Different products serving different customers constrain the value of your brand, penetration of your brand into the professional lives of your customers, and it limits the value of your first-party data as engagement is fairly shallow. It's also really hard to defend against new entrants, and those new entrants into your market could be big tech aggregators with great features and technology, or they could be niche players who are born digital and prepared and kind of built for this technology age. So a couple of things to focus on to move on to stage 2. One is to center your customers rather than your traditional product formats and focus on what your customers need ahead of what your product is. And the other is to ensure that your content and product data is structured, machine readable, and not siloed away to open up the opportunities for the innovation that stage 2 requires. And stage 2 is delivering personalized, granular content. So rather than individual publications with big long-form pieces of content, it's breaking your content down into smaller chunks that get people to the insights they need. Your products are starting to deliver value across more touch points and in a more personalized way at this stage. You can start thinking about services that enhance your user's experience beyond just reading a piece of content. So this might be in-event services, contextual information that goes alongside a piece of content or data, content collections, newsletters, and that kind of and the like. And this is enabled by content that is broken down, structured, and managed as a series of individual data points, connecting people to the insights that they need. And it reduces the amount of effort that your users need to go through to get to what they need. And it's also enabled by people who are starting to put users at the center of their operations. So automating things that don't add value for their customers, regularly acting on user feedback and building an understanding of the value that they're providing to their specific niche and developing that more and more. You'll be starting to see a structure to how I've put the slides together here. So at this stage, user centricity is starting to become evident. The right people are getting the right insights, but you're still not meeting them where they need you. So that what we've been talking about, so meeting at the point of need, you're still way off at this stage. And the lure of less specialist aggregators with great tech and engaging user experiences is still very strong here. Holding attention from your users becomes more difficult as their consumer experiences become more immersive and you're still just serving up content as it was. But the advantage that you have here is that you're starting to get more insight from your first-party data. So going further is possible. And you should use this to identify opportunities for new services which use these granular content chunks that you've created and broken your publications down into to deliver brand new value. And also you need to be ready to flip mindsets internally because this is the bigger change coming up. Stage 3 is providing value-add services on top of your content, so beyond the kind of the pure products of the research or the journalism that you do as a core, or event production that you do as part of your core business. At this stage, your products are automatically curating knowledge from multiple information sources, and you're providing additional layers of value derived from the insights that that content contains. So this might be predictive analytics, Gen AI tooling, individual creator brands, self-service insights, or even repeatable consulting services that you might deploy on top of your core content. Your content is predictive, it's deepening the value of your brand to decision makers, and great experiences are enabled by data strategy supported by a culture of leveraging content throughout the value chain. So not only through your core product, but also via the systems that your customers are using in their own workflows or internal systems of some of your bigger customers who have their own in-house technology, or even through commercial partnerships with third parties. Your business functions are agile and your people are empowered to evolve in order to serve user needs through new sales models and cross-company collaboration. They're willing to let go of what might have been successful in the past, and they actually relish the thought of transforming themselves and their roles. So structured. So this stage gets you onto a level footing with what I would kind of describe as the current best in breed information companies. So some of them listed there: BMJ, EIU, Wood Mackenzie Lens Platform, and QuestX, who are doing some really interesting things in events. But also the aggregators who are serving up answers already through easy to use interfaces. This stage reduces the requirement for customers to know exactly what they need to search to find what they're looking for. And your value add services are helping to fortify your position in the face of inevitable IP leakage, because your value is coming from more than just your content in isolation. But inevitably, there are still risks. It looks really good now, it looks great, but consumer expectations are not standing still. And the cost of intelligence is trending towards zero as enormous strides in AI are made week on week. I was reminded by an Ethan Mollick LinkedIn post this morning, which is just, his LinkedIn is just an amazing resource. I was reminded that Bloomberg's self-trained LLM, which they spent in excess of $10 million on last year, is outperformed on finance tasks by GPT-4. And I think that's a stark reminder that proprietary data alone is not enough. The reasoning of these models is going to get better and better. So using that technology to focus on the customer experience within your niche becomes ever more important. And I think a really interesting thing here is thinking beyond the constraints of text as the default input and or output as a next step. So you've started to go through a really fundamental mindset shift, which means opportunities for better user experiences, new sales models, and new product creation are within reach. So at this stage, I think the really important thing is to take a step further and think really, really big. How might VR or AR or frontier models or audio interfaces or whatever it is that comes next as the big consumer technology, how is that going to deliver a step change in value to your users? And it's this change in thinking which takes us on to stage 4 on the map and our vision for 2034, which is delivering prescriptive intelligence at the point of need. So as opposed to where we were in stage 1, where your product is publication based or single event based, your product is now driven by machine translation of your content produced from your research outputs or your journalism or your event production. Is translated into audio or visual or generative or immersive experiences that don't have any real resemblance to that initial output. And your users, like Cleo, she's back because we're at stage 4 now. So your users, like Cleo, are employing AI tooling and AI agents at other stages of the value chain to act on the intelligence that you're delivering. And your people are enabled by the same tools. And this gives them the space to be creative and to better cater to a user group that's engaging with intelligence every and anywhere in their professional lives. So this is our vision of 2034, but it's critical to understand that there is no endpoint in 2034, obviously. By then, we should be looking ahead to 2044 and beyond that. But I think that going on this journey will stand you in really good stead for that. And yes, I'll pass back to Jennifer.
I was just doing a quick calculation in my head as to whether I might have retired in 2044, and probably not. So, so I need to pay attention to this next slide. So the information providers that are thriving in 2034 and are looking healthy as they start to face down the next 10 years have done a number of things, which I'll just kind of talk briefly about. So the first is that they've responded flexibly to changing user expectations. I think this idea of flexibility as we face change that's gone faster than ever before. They've been flexible, they've listened to their users, but they've also understood how change is being driven in our customers' professional lives, because most of us are in the B2B space, our customers' professional lives, by changes in big tech and by those consumer experiences that are all around them. The successful companies have put a premium on reducing time to value for their customers. So think about Google early answering the question before I'd even finished asking it. That's reducing the time to value. They've moved up the value chain from that descriptive informational text through to prescriptive content, analytics, forecasting, etc., etc. They've addressed new markets, new types of customers. Now that could be new audiences, that could be aggregators, that could be licensors, that could be partnerships. And they've done this by being culturally agile and being able to move on from what was successful in the past. They've deepened and strengthened that brand value by engaging with customers, engaging with niches, engaging with them in multiple places across the value chain, across their wider workflow. And they've ultimately increased revenues, increased retained revenues through maybe sophisticated sales models, new partnerships, licensing deals, data as a service, so licensing data via API, all that kind of lovely stuff. And they've capitalized on opportunities that new technology presents by getting in on the ground floor during what was for them the last great technological disruption, which, if it's not already obvious, I mean generative AI. I mean the thing that's happening right now. So I'm interested to hear how everyone's getting to grips with making their first steps in that world, because it looks like for our successful publisher, we want to be starting to take those steps, if not already, then now.
So it feels like we've zipped through an awful lot of detail there at really quite a high level. So hopefully there are kind of strands in there that you want to pick up on, questions to ask. And as I say, we're really keen to pick up the conversation after this and to dive into more detail once you've seen the slides for a bit longer. But just to kind of wrap up the presentational part, there's only one way to get started on the journey to serving users like Clio in 2034. And that's to build confidence in where you are right now and to identify the opportunities that you have to move forward. I think there's a huge amount of benefit and value, even if you don't have your sights set on stage 4 right now, a huge amount of benefit and value to your organisation setting out on the journey. And at 67 Bricks, we do a lot of work with information organisations to partner and help them capture that value all the way through. So get in touch with us afterwards. Love to keep chatting. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Love to continue the conversation, and I think we're ready for questions now.
So if anyone has any questions, if you could just pop them into the chat. Just while you're talking about don't assume text as the input, and it already struck me, my 13-year-old son only does voice. He talks to everything and it all just happens for him. And that's now, so in 2034, I imagine that's going to be old news already by his standards. So you were saying kind of be confident in the data and the info you've got now. What advice would you have for someone starting along the move along the journey? Would it be, sort of setting your data out right? Does it all come back to back end stuff?
I think all 4 elements of the journey are really important. But actually, I do think getting your content and data sorted out is a really good first step, because it enables the innovation that can then bring the people and the product and everything else along with you. So I think, yes, if you wanted to, I think the most important thing is to make an honest appraisal of where you are. And you may be in different places on those streams. You might be at stage 2 with your people and stage 3 with your data, whatever it is. But identifying the places that are holding you back and focusing on those to make strides forward. And obviously I would say this, but bringing in external help to take that objective view, I think is a really important part of that, because some of this is about killing your darlings and moving on to the next thing and looking forward, and there's a lot of cultural baggage that can come with that.
So you talk about sort of moving the people stuff along. Do you have any advice for cultural change to move the people stuff along?
So we talked about kind of
You go, Will.
consumer expectations throughout this, and I think encouraging. I think your customers aren't existing just as your customers, so your people shouldn't either. They shouldn't just be your people. They should. I think encouraging them to engage with broader digital experiences and think about what all that might mean for the niche that they're serving is a really good way to empower them and to kind of build a groundswell for taking the steps forward. If they're just focusing on, we produce this series of content, this is what we do, it's very difficult to kind of build buy-in for making some step change in the product that you offer.
Yeah. Adrian's asked a question. So you've delivered a compelling vision of the future. Did you consider alternative scenarios? What happens if the vision doesn't look like what you predicted in 10 years' time?
Oh, it won't.
Yeah, we did half expect this question. Yeah.
Yes, we did consider alternative scenarios, and I think that there's a variety of different ways it could progress, and there's some really, I think, a few things that could happen that could really move the dial. I think I'm especially keeping an eye on AI generated video and things like that at the moment, keeping a big eye on what's happening in the legislative space across the world. So yes, I think you always underestimate what's that thing that you always overestimate what can change in a year and underestimate what can change in 5 years, and I think that's going to very much be the case here. We're probably describing something that's closer to 5 years out or 8 years out. But yes, absolutely. But the kind of broader notion of being culturally agile, listening to users, watching what they do in their consumer lives, getting your data and content into a state where you've got control over it, it's kind of treated as a data asset, it's flexible, it's scalable. That's all going to stand you in a great stead, because things are going to keep moving and keep changing, and that much we do know for sure, I think.
Yeah, I think the journey is fairly agnostic about the actual what 2034 looks like. I think taking the steps give you the flexibility to be in a position to deal with whatever it is.
So it's all about being prepared for whichever direction it's going.
I think so, yeah. And yeah, there will be things that shape that direction of travel. The OpenAI, New York Times judgment will send things in some direction or another, and yeah, but who's to say what those things are between now and then?
Yeah, and in some ways the the horse is bolted, right? I mean, OpenAI has that content. So yeah, it's an interesting world we're facing. There's a question about build versus buy, which is always an interesting question, and the answer is always very much it depends. But I think as we look towards the future, the answer is I think that there's a third option, which is around kind of taking the best in breeds and adapting them and making them useful for your own needs. I don't know, Will, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And it's the event that we were at last week, somebody said on stage, it's a very consultant's answer to say it depends, but it does depend. Yeah, I think that third way of integrating best in breed, and I think it comes back to flexibility. If you're signing up to vendor kind of technologies that lock you in and don't allow you to move and tie your product down for 5 years, that's not going to give you what you need. But there may be SaaS tools that you can flexibly roll out and test and work with. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both, and that we always say that for build versus buy, but I really think it is.
I think specifically in the generative AI space as well, because everything's still in flux and we're still having a bit of a space race as to, will it be Meta, will it be OpenAI, will it be, who's going to be the winner, so to speak. And there's countless models developing at kind of super fast speeds. We do have some customers who are making decisions now which somewhat lock them in a little bit, and I would caution against locking yourself in ever, but especially at this stage because things are moving so fast. So whenever we build technology, we would always try and build it in such a way that things are kind of plug in and outable, modular, componentized, so that you don't lock yourself in. Certainly, a lot of publishers have existing relationships with Microsoft, for example, and are being kind of ushered down that route, which is great and great to get your hands dirty and start trying things. But yeah, what I would say is be mindful of locking yourself in whilst everything is still so in flux.
Daniel's asked a question about what would your advice be on determining what content you share with the bots and which data you don't. So I'm guessing that's before and after gates and whatnot.
Good question.
Is that another it depends answer depending on the business and the model and the strategy?
I think it's hard to say right. It's hard for me to say right now without more kind of, I don't know that there's like a hard and fast rule. My view is broadly that in the horizon we're talking about, proprietary data has lost its kind of competitive value, and actually it's the insights that you're deriving from it, and it could even be publicly accessible data that if you're running some service that's deriving for more value out of it, then that's your competitive edge, and that's where things are going. I think I think we're going to see a lot of leakage, and I think time is better spent now thinking about what those additional services are, the value add services are, than trying to defend against leakage.
And I'm guessing that's where your trust element comes in. You've got to build your trust in your data because there's going to be so much false information out there.
Yeah, and the reasoning of large language models will mean that they can do a lot with publicly accessible data anyway. And that, there will be data sets, proprietary data sets that other people do not have access to, and you should lock them up and keep using them for commercial advantage. But I think that will diminish over time if you're not doing more. Yeah. Jennifer, what's your
I was just going to add that I think sometimes, without meaning any disrespect to the many publishers I talk to, that sometimes people conflate because there's a big difference between your content and data, your IP being used to train something like OpenAI as a model, and using a bot, for want of a better word, in a safe, controlled environment, which again might be OpenAI, but in a sort of walled garden scenario to deliver personalized services and experiences for your customers. And those are two quite different things. So I would definitely urge against being very kind of binary in that, because I think there are flavors of giving content to bots as well, and definitely in 2034 bots will be using our content for sure.
And Christopher from Beard Group was just interested in your thoughts on what use of email for content delivery further down the line. Do you think email is going to be phased out, replaced by something else? Will it still have a place?
What does your teenager make of email?
Yeah, good point. He wants something to be read to him. He doesn't want to have to do any reading of words.
It's an interesting one, though, isn't it? Because a few years ago, I think we were often sort of bemoaning email alerts. That feels like a very old school kind of delivery method. But actually, you think of, I mean, I am reliant on email newsletters now for my kind of generative AI news. And the whole kind of Substack business model seems to have given email as a delivery method a completely new lease of life. And there are media businesses built off the back of email delivery. And I don't think I certainly wouldn't have predicted that 5 years ago. So it's really hard to say. But it does, I mean,
it depends.
Yeah, I think I would have 5 years ago, and even before, even 10 years ago, say, when I was working in ed tech and we were doing a lot of business with China, and there's no email in the future, it's all chat based. That was the mantra. I think that has shifted, and yes, if you look at the kind of niche paid for email newsletter business models that are coming out, and that's I think partially a bit of a backlash. That's a bit what I was talking about, the niche online communities flourishing. It's in this world of complete information overload and almost too much information, and people are busy, and they we crave, I think, kind of focused attention on something that really interests us. And I think that's where that kind of rise of the email newsletter has come from. And it's really super interesting. And yeah, subscribing to kind of micro interests. I'm just sort of starting to dip my toe into that water, but it's absolutely fascinating.
And it fits with the trend in that FT kind of younger generation media consumption report about kind of trusting individuals more and wanting to connect with kind of individual content producers more and more. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with that. So if that continues, then who knows?
Yeah, I guess it all comes down to giving wanted content. If it's wanted and welcome, it'll always have a place. The minute it stops being that, then it will no longer.
Someone was saying to me, keep talking about this event last week. Someone was saying to me there that I think maybe their son, talking about sons, I think maybe their son, the way that they use their email inbox is completely different to how we might use it. They see it just as a feed of content rather than a communication method.
Or something to get to zero, that old adage of
it's not that at all. It's just pick and choose
impossible.
the data that's in there.
Yeah, and they don't have that stress that they haven't actually read all their emails, or even like, oh, I must get through them all. They just couldn't care less. Yeah, it's interesting.
There's an interesting question as well about why bother to learn anything, and I think from my own kind of late high school into university years, that was when Wikipedia came out, and there was an awful lot of backlash against using Wikipedia as cheating. You shouldn't be using Wikipedia, and I remember, for example, and again, this is not disrespectful because I know I sound very old now when I talk about video and things like that, but I remember my grandmother being very anti spell checkers because why on earth you shouldn't use a spell checker, you need to learn. And I think that the kind of experience of learning in the classroom has shifted so much over the last 50 years, 20 years, even 10 years. It's really fascinating. I don't think that we can stop, or we should stop, the younger generation using AI in their education, because that is what they're going to be doing in the workforce ultimately, and it's the kind of world that they're coming out. But it's I think somebody's put in the chat, and it's a really interesting philosophical question as to what it means to learn anything. So I don't have an answer to that. I'm just
that seems slightly bit our brief.
So Dan from VBD was just saying that it's going to be harder and harder to compete for readers or users' attention. So obviously, niche is one strategy that you've mentioned. Are there any other strategies that you could think of or suggest in terms of, I don't know, getting that reader or user to come to you rather than just seeing what's out there for free? I'm guessing that comes down to the trust element. If you're consistently...
It comes down to trust, personalization. So it's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever looked on someone else's Netflix account or someone else's Spotify account or whatever. It's entirely different stuff that gets pushed to them as gets pushed to you. And I keep my Spotify subscription going because it builds me excellent playlists, and it knows what I like. It knows my embarrassing taste in music, and that's fine, and that's great, and it knows me. So I think personalization is a really interesting thing to think about. Niche, yes. What else? I
I
think
think
there's something we're seeing, and maybe it's the newsletter thing about paying for. So there's this idea of FOMO, especially in some of the think about regulatory information or something. If you miss a piece of information, then there'll be runctions, right? Um, but people don't want information overload. So there's actually a premium on giving the right information and only the right information. So filtering out the noise, while still not missing anything. There's definitely a premium to be had for that, and that might be a little bit what the newsletters are about as well. Will, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think that maybe this fits into niche, but I think if you're offering some service or some insight inferred from content and data that they can't find anywhere else, the kind of value add on top, then I think they will come back. And if you're providing prescriptive intelligence that guides what they do, and through a product offer that fits in with the other tooling that they're using in their working lives, then I think that's the kind of value that we should start shifting our thinking towards. We've got the great content. What are the things that we can provide on top of that that nobody else can? And how can we tie it in with how users are consuming their intelligence?
I think as much as we would like to think otherwise, most people are not using our content to enjoy the content in and of itself. They tend to be using it for some other purpose, so to complete a task or to get some sort of insight or information, to do something in their job, to treat a patient if it's medical, that kind of thing. So always keeping that user goal in mind, and then to think about whether whether technology can help you with that. So start with the user problem.
I just have a couple of questions still from going back to your slides. You were showing the different stages, 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of progression. Are the KPIs for stage 4 different to the stages for 1, 2, 3? And if so, how? What are we looking for at the end goal? Which won't be an end goal, it will be a pause goal while we look for the next 10 years.
I think they're probably not different, and we're mainly subscription businesses here, and retention and attrition and progressing customers through sales subscription tiers are always going to be the kind of key metrics for businesses like ours. And I don't think transforming your products necessarily changes those fundamentals, but I suppose there's additional things to measure, and as we look for value beyond the content and what the opportunities are, making sure that we're measuring uptake and engagement and beyond your core product or your core event, or
Keeping your eye on the
in the new
prize and
channels that
making sure you're measuring the end goal.
I think that's the key thing as we kind of look for to shape the strategy that takes you to stage 4.
And then I think last question I had was you mentioned that the end users might or will probably be machines rather than people. What difference does that make in terms of now and how we plan for the future?
Jennifer, do you want to? I'm happy to take that, but
You go first if you like.
well, I don't think it makes necessarily a huge difference, because as a fundamental starting point, getting your content and data into a shape that supports really good end user experiences and understandable and readable and ingestible by machine users, for want of a better word, via API and other delivery mechanisms is a really important starting point either way. And ultimately, your machine users might be just an interface between you and your customers. At the end of the day, they might be taking your content and turning it into the immersive experiences that we kind of alluded to in stage 4. So it might just be an additional layer between you and the customers, a way to take your research and your journalism and your event production and turn it into the thing that your users want to consume. And I think the way to build up an idea of what the differences might be is to start engaging with large language models now and understand what works for them. What are the best what are the best prompts to get the best results? What does that mean for the way that we structure our content and data? And I think that's a good way to get started.
Yeah, I would just add two things as well to that, which I fully agree with. But yeah, also think about the kind of people element. So we have one client I'm thinking of in particular who's probably at this between stage 2 and 3 of Will's map. So they're already treating their content as kind of granular chunks of data that they'll then slice and dice in interesting ways in different products. But the real challenge there was actually getting their editorial team and their staff to think about how the content would actually be taken by machines and sliced and diced and served up in new products. So they were still kind of approaching it as, I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit this long form document, and I won't repeat that word here and here because I've already used that word in section 1 and things like that. So it's kind of thinking as though the only use is the person reading it from start to finish, and that very much isn't the use for that particular piece of content. So there was a sort of cultural shift as well for people internally, and actually, once that's understood, it's hugely exciting because then you can get excited about all the different product opportunities and the kind of scale and reach that these pieces of content can have. And the other thing, as Will also alluded, is that it's really important then that things like being able to serve up your content and data via API, that data as a services piece, isn't just a sort of bolt-on. So we have a few customers who they provide content via an API to their special favorite customer, maybe because they've asked them once, but they're not charging them once. It's a favor to their favorite customer, and it's a big workaround. But actually, increasingly, that's a really attractive. It should be a chunky revenue stream. It's a really attractive part of the business model. So I would think about that and take that really seriously. And so think about your platform maybe as one consumer of those APIs, but one of many.
Going back to Dan's question about what data you let go, I mean, it's really good to take these one-off things and turn them into repeatable revenue streams, but you are kind of letting the genie out of the bottle, programmatically sending your data off to other customers, which makes it much harder to control what happens to it. So, I mean, I'm for the latter. Sorry, what am I for? I'm for doing it. I'm for doing it. But it's one of those balances, and I think we need to, as a sort of industry, as a sector, we need to let go of the fear, I think, of losing control of the content.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment from Stephanie Wilford in the chat about revenue, and perhaps this enables us to push all our price points a lot higher. I think there's an interesting thing happening where, yes, pricing on volume is being replaced by pricing on kind of value, for want of a better word. So what is the thing that your content helps someone to do? What's the value of that to the business or to the user you're selling? Historically, certainly in some verticals of the industry, I'm thinking like scholarly journals and stuff like that, it was very much a volume game, like big packages. I think we'll see less of that and much more pricing to value, and certainly that's what I'd recommend anyway, because I know from what I know about Renewed's community, we have a lot of people serving really specialist niches for whom the content has high value over generalist content. It's expert content, but expert content is a threat from generative AI as well, so got to keep moving.
Unmuted. You've given us a lot to think about. There don't seem to be any more questions. Before we wrap up, we've got 2 minutes. Just kind of, is there any other one key point or any other issue that you want to, or just key summary really that you want to raise, or are we good to wrap up? What's the one thing everyone should start doing now when they get off the call? Or one thing they start thinking about? I'm putting you both completely on the spot here.
Just do something. Don't do nothing. Don't be. There's a sort of fight flight.
Yeah.
And
I think there's a real hesitancy, kind of just wait and see what, who's going to win the AI race, who's going to win the next big thing, and then we'll go with them. I think there is a hesitancy to just start.
Yeah, and I think we need to do that anyway as consumers. Even if we flip this for a moment and think about ourselves as information consumers in the future, there's going to be a lot of impetus on us to pay attention and not get hoodwinked by false information and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to have to be literate in this world, and
That's
certainly,
a good point. Yeah,
as a company, I think I've said this before in our AI webinars and things like that, but we're starting to see it now. And I'm starting to see it even in our own company, is that kind of demand for change in this sort of AI-driven world. That demand, yes, it's going to come from your board because they're going to expect things faster and higher productivity and cheaper and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's easy to see that, oh yes, the board are going to demand more. But we're starting to see it come from junior staff members now. Why on earth would they want to do something that they know for a fact could be easily automated? They're not going to. So the workforce of the future is also going to hold us accountable for kind of the moves that we don't make now. So yeah, my advice would be do something.
Mine is look at the map, see where you drop us an email.
Definitely.
Find your starting point. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer and Will. It's been a fantastic session, and as I say, really.
You muted again,
Oh,
Sue.
she's muted.
I'll take myself off. I was just thanking you guys. Thanks very much for your time. I think it's been a fantastic session. You've given us lots to think about. For everyone else, I will send out the recording link at a link to the slides so you can mull it over at your leisure. But yes, thank you very much.